Welcome back, Honors, right? Welcome back, Just Honors. Welcome back, you guys. Welcome back to your, I can't believe I'm saying this for the second time today, and I'm recording y'all a brand new flip because you just asked me so nicely, class, right? Welcome to your very last flip. Welcome to your last flip that you have for this class, and we will be wrapping up all the content from Western Civ and stuff like that. But before we get all mushy and stuff, before we do the stuff at the very end where I say thank y'all for being awesome and all that shenanigans, what I figure we'll do is we'll go ahead and bust out the nitty-gritty, right? We'll go ahead and go over the content stuff, make sure we got all that stuff in the right spots, and then we'll get after it a little bit, right? So we left off in class talking about D-Day, right? We left off in class talking about the invasion of North Africa leading to the invasion of Italy and how that kind of stalled out on the entire Italian campaign as well. We talked about rats and wallpaper soup in Russia. Now Leningrad and Stalingrad and Moscow are never going to surrender to Nazi attacks, right? And it's going to lead to the lives being lost of millions of Russian civilians and stuff like that. Many historians actually argue, and this might be a short answer question, many historians actually argue that Russia is actually more to kind of like sing the song of victory for World War II, because if they had not actually been able to withstand the Nazi attacks, then World War II might have been lost, right? But we won't get into that little nitty-gritty stuff right now. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Don't worry, Mackenzie. We'll go over it, right? So now the biggest thing about it, though, in the big long run of it is we don't want to now come at it from two sides, right? Because we got one side coming up from Italy. We got the Russians holding off their side. That is already a two-front war. So this is actually a typo. We actually want to come at them from three different sides, right? And the Allies decide to open up a new avenue of invasion, and they want to invade northern France, right? Now remember, northern France is also known as Normandy, right? Now we talked about this back in the day when we talked about the invasion of England from William of Normandy at the Battle of Hastings, Cobb, 1066. Now, so the big thing about it though is, in the long run, the Allies are going to decide to attack Normandy, right? Now, this operation is known as D-Day, that Abigail Ragusa so well put it and stuff like that. That actually means nothing. D doesn't stand for anything, right? But it's also known as Operation Overlord, right? As in, overwhelm the Nazi defenses and open a gaping hole in their Nazi defenses and begin to try and roll them up and liberate France, right? So the thing about it was that D-Day was designed as a very strategic direct assault onto northern France from the Allied forces, right? If you are looking for something to watch this summer, there's a series called Band of Brothers that is absolutely fantastic, and it starts off with the Normandy invasion. Ava Smith, I'd highly suggest that you let your grandpa or your dad know, and you can totally watch that together. It's so good. Band of Brothers is on HBO. It's fantastic. Now, the biggest thing about it, though, is this event, Operation Overlord, D-Day, is going to happen on June 6, 1944, really late into this whole war. A lot of people think that D-Day happened really, really early on in the war, but it actually happened within a year of the war's end, right? June 6, 1944 is going to be the actual time that D-Day happens, and the war ends in Europe on May 8th, 1945. So within a year after D-Day, the Allies are going to successfully actually lead to the end of the war in an Allied victory, right? But to understand D-Day, you got to understand how it worked, right? So the plan is a joint assault of Normandy to open up this massive hole, and it was going to have 3 waves of soldiers. Now, these waves of soldiers were going to be launched by 2 different methods. One, paratroopers that would be dropped behind the Nazi defenses in France, and then 2, an amphibious assault where soldiers would land on the beaches and directly attack, right? So the basic method is like this. Do you see the planes right here, the blue planes? Those are paratroopers being brought in from England and dropped by parachute behind the Nazi defenses back here in the mainland of France. Now, the whole time this is happening, these planes are being shot at. This is happening the night of January 5th, going into the morning of, the night of June 5th, going into the morning of June 6th. And, like, they're literally littering all of these paratroopers behind the enemy lines, trying to put pressure on the Nazis from their behind, from their, like, actually their rear, right? And so then the other plan was to mount a gigantic mobile assault and amphibious assault on the beaches itself to kind of crush the Nazi defenses in one area. And the entire attack was meant to take place in these 5 beaches, right? 5 beachheads that were going to get attacked. And the names of the beaches were Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, right? And it was going to be 3 of those beaches were going to be attacked by Americans. 1 was going to be attacked by a joint American and British force, and the other one was going to be attacked by the Canadians, right? Now, a really quick thing about it, though, is this was very dangerous, an extremely dangerous assault, because it was a lot of environmental conditions that were really bad. First of all, if you're landing on the beaches in these amphibious assault crafts, like, it's a very dangerous thing, because literally that little door right there is going to open up, and you have to storm onto the beaches and run up here as fast as you possibly can while being shot at. That's the amphibious assault. And for the paratroopers, it was awful, awful weather conditions. It was very windy, it was dark, and they were being shot at by the Nazi soldiers on the bottom by these things known as flak guns, which are exploding shells in the air. And what would end up happening is the paratroopers got all spaced out and separated and sparsed all over the place, and they didn't even know where they were, and they were behind enemy lines, which is a terrifying place to be. Now, the thing about it, though, in the long run is what they end up having to do is they attack these 5 centralized beaches. And I know some people like Gianna or Kirsten right now are probably thinking to themselves, they're like, wait a minute, hold up, pump the brakes. Why would they not attack the entire area of northern France? Reason being, guys, is because if you do that, you're spreading your forces too thin, right? Now, some of you are like, yeah, but if you attack one area of the entire beaches, don't the Nazis have the ability to centralize all their army to repel your invasion? You would be right, but what we decided to do was confuse the ever-loving daylights out of them. So what we actually did before the invasion of Normandy is we sent all of these telegrams and messages knowing that the Nazis were going to intercept them, right? Knowing the Germans were going to intercept these communications, and we wanted to intentionally confuse them. That's why we actually had like all these question marks right here, because we were like, we're going to attack this beach. Nope, we're going to attack this beach. Nope, we're going to attack this beach. Nope, we're going to attack that beach. Nope, we're going to show up down here. And then like the Germans were like, where are they going to show up? And then we came through with a sledgehammer right here into these 5 beachheads. Like I said, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword, right? And this invasion was extremely intense. Very dangerous. And we looked at the actual pictures of the Normandy cemetery today. We looked at the picture of the artist that did all the bodies of course, that like actually were like done on the beach and stuff like that to demonstrate the massive loss of life that occurred in this day. But still, all the same, the Allies would go unopposed and take over this Nazi beachhead very aggressively. Even though the Germans were heavily dug into this bulkhead and this beachhead, the Allied forces were able to actually overwhelm them with those waves. And they didn't even have to actually use all 3. They only used 2 of the waves, right? And so they show up and they break in and they literally create a giant gaping hole in the German defenses, and the Germans begin to retreat backwards, right? And they start to fall back into northern France. And that's when the Allies decide to do what Hitler did too, and we decided to push into France as fast as possible and to liberate the city of Paris, right? And in August of 1944, less than a month after the D-Day invasion, the Allies liberate the city of Paris from German control. No more Hitler taking fangirl photos in front of the Eiffel Tower. Now they are a liberated community, and they are actually a part of the war effort, and they are progressing, and their army is going to help us push the Germans back into France, right? So look at this map real quick. This is so important that you understand, and it's also on your study guide. All the gray area right there are Hitler and his allies, Mussolini mainly, right? So it's the Italians and the German forces that are preventing us from being able to win this war, right? But now it is a matter of time until they lose. Because look at this. You've got the Russians over here on the Eastern Front holding up, and then they're going to begin to push back once D-Day is successful. After the D-Day invasion, you have the invasion of northern France coming in and pushing the Nazi lines back. And then also you have the Italian campaign pushing up, and the Axis powers are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And we begin to invade in a very aggressive fashion, right? Very aggressive fashion. And within 6 months, we're on the border of Germany, baby. Now, one of the biggest things that happens, though, after a series of other battles, there were so many other battles in World War II that I'm glossing over, right? There was Operation Market Garden, there's the Siege of Carentan, there's literally all these battles that I'm just jumping over. But a big battle does happen in the winter of 1945. The late winter of 1944 going into the winter of 1945, because it was December into January, and the Allies got stalled out. And they got stalled out in a standoff in the Ardennes Forest, right? Now, the Ardennes Forest is a part of what used to be called the Rhineland. You remember the whole thing when Hitler wasn't supposed to remilitarize the Rhineland, and he did it anyway. So the Allies pushed the Germans back, and a standoff in the Ardennes Forest in the middle of winter happens. And it was an extremely grueling battle known as the Battle of the Bulge, right? The reason why it was called the Battle of the Bulge we'll get to in a second, but these are the conditions that the Allies were fighting in, and they were heavily under-equipped, right? I know some of you are like, man, this is like when Napoleon invaded Russia. You're not that far off, right? So the big thing about it is, though, in the long run is the Allies were having to try to push through this entire area in the middle of the snow, and many of them did not have proper winter clothing, and their guns were jamming, and they were also being shelled by German artillery guns the entire time and having to fight in the dead of winter. Some were getting frostbite. Some were running out of food. Some were running out of water to drink because it was freezing and stuff like that. And then going into it, though, in the long run, the reason why it was called the Battle of the Bulge is because the environmental conditions were so bad. Now, look really, really quickly. Notice the red line, though? We're almost in Germany. Like, Germany is right there. The Rhine River is right there, right? So the big thing about it is you're this close to breaking through into Germany and getting to the end of this war, right? But this battle line, the red battle line, as you can see on this side is the German defenses, and on this side it's the Allies. As they begin to push in, the environmental conditions in the snow and the winter were so bad that the Allies and the Germans really had no idea where they were, right? Literally, the Germans were like, okay, we're just going to defend these trees right here. And they had no idea where their compatriots were, where their allies were, where their reinforcements were. And so what happened is that the battle line kind of bulged outward, right? At one point, there was a company of American soldiers right here that were surrounded by the Germans, and they had no idea because literally it was that bad. It was that bad. And so the battle lines are bulging out. It's called the Battle of the Bulge and stuff like that because everything is being pushed out further into the battle lines, and it's all over the place, right? Now, the thing about it is, though, is in the long run, what does end up happening at the Battle of the Bulge is the Americans are able, as the snow kind of melts out a little bit and as the conditions get better, the Americans are able to push that battle line all the way back into Germany. Wait a second. That's right. I said it. The Allies pushed the battle line back into Germany because the German forces and the Italian forces cannot handle being attacked by the Russians, by the Allies on the Western Front, by the Allies in Italy. And they're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then their leadership is getting worse and worse and worse. And at one point in July of 1944, somebody tried to assassinate Hitler, and he's making erratic decisions and all this other stuff. And they begin to crumble. And the thing is, the cowards then take the coward's way out, right? By the spring of 1945, Russians were pushing into Berlin, which is, of course, the German capital. And Allies are pushing in from the east and coming up through Italy. And what ends up happening is a ridiculous thing. Either the fascist leaders of Italy, you've got Mussolini and Hitler, both of them end up dead in the spring of 1945. Benito Mussolini would be captured, arrested, shot, and killed by his own people, right? Like his own people. Italians captured him and said, "You promised us glory," da, da, da. Arrested him, killed him, and then beat his hanging upside down body like it was a piñata, right? They literally hung Mussolini's body upside down from a gas station and all ran by with sticks and other objects, throwing rocks at his dead body and beating him to death. His favorite drink was also outlawed in Italy for several years. And we'll talk more about that, of course, when we get into class. But Mussolini is now dead, and the Italians surrender. So the Germans are left all alone. And Hitler then takes the ultimate coward's way out. He decides to go and get married to this woman that he had been seeing named Eva Braun. And then they decide to have their honeymoon together. And their honeymoon was in a bunker. And in that bunker, he went down there with his new wife, and he killed her, killed their dogs, and then he killed himself, right? He gave all of them poison cyanide pills, and then he took a gun and he shot himself in a bunker the day after he got married because he knew if he didn't surrender that it wasn't going to be the Americans and the Brits that showed up and got him, that it was going to be the Russians. And why the Russians would have been so much worse is because as the Russians were pushing in from the east, guess what they were discovering over there? The concentration camps. They were discovering the Holocaust camps that Hitler was using during the entirety of World War II. And they also discovered in those camps that some of their Russian comrades were inside of those camps as well. So the Russians, had they gotten a hold of Hitler, it was not going to be a good day for him. So he decides to commit suicide and kill himself before the Russians ever capture him. And this day, this is the bunker that he actually committed suicide in. The Nazi generals are then going to take his body and bring it out into a ditch and have it burned. Now this, of course, leads to a conspiracy theory that Hitler never actually died. But actually we had one piece of his jaw left. Like one little bit and piece of his jaw was left remaining. Let me look it up real quick. So Hitler's jaw. Like Hitler's jaw was actually like the only remaining artifact from his entire body and stuff like that that actually survived the burning and stuff. And so these are actual pictures of it. And a French dentist has actually recently done an entire analysis of all of his teeth and stuff. And they have found out that that was his teeth and that he did commit suicide on that day and that he did actually die. He didn't run away to Argentina or anything like that. Now, the big thing about it, though, in the long run is he is now dead. So will the war continue? And the answer is It will not, right? Because on May 8th, 1945, it's known as Victory in Europe Day, right? Because the German soldiers are going to finally surrender, except for a handful of SS officers and stuff like that they have to chase out of Germany. For the handful of SS officers, they had to clear out of Germany and stuff like that. But on May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day is declared. But wait a minute! That's only Victory in Europe. There's a whole other area to this entire war. That's right, we got the Pacific Theater on our hands now. So the Allies decide to turn towards the Pacific Theater, right? The Pacific Theater is a very interesting little thing because remember we talked about this in class and we were like, which one are you going to go for first? You're going to do Europe first, the Pacific first, da-da-da-da. And I was like, you're going to do Europe first. The actually thing is though, they didn't really do the Europe first thing the whole way. They did land in Europe first, and they landed in North Africa before they ever actually attacked and stuff like that in the Pacific. But the Pacific Theater actually began before D-Day even started, right? Some of the initial major battles of the Pacific Theater were the Battle of Midway, because it was an island that was midway between Hawaii and Japan, and then the Battle of Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands are going to be major battles that are going to happen in the Pacific Theater, which are all going to have a defining characteristic. They're going to be mostly fought in the air, and over top of aircraft carriers, right? So it would be a lot of Japanese planes versus American planes, having dogfights and shooting at each other, and then flak shots being shot from different boats at the different planes and stuff like that. And for example, this right here is an American cruiser that is showing a devastating attack from a Nazi kamikaze, and a kamikaze is a Japanese kamikaze, and a Japanese kamikaze pilot is a fighter pilot that's trained that if his plane is actually wounded and about to go down, that he flies it into something, killing themselves, and then also wounding the enemy as much as possible. So as you can see, those air raid battles were the defining characteristic of the early part of the Pacific Theater, and the thing was that the Allies realized, especially the American generals realized, that this is not getting enough done fast enough, and so they adopt a new strategy called island hopping, right? And island hopping is basically literally where they started off in Midway, and they literally just kind of began to attack the different island chains that Japan had actually taken over, including places like Guam and the Philippines and stuff like that. And they would literally just take over one island at a time and then just hop along the entire way, continuing to take over one island after another. Some of the biggest island hopping battles were, of course, the sieges of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, right? Now, the thing about it is that these were very devastating land sieges because a lot of American lives were lost in these because literally the Japanese had tunnels that were dug underneath the entire island. The American flamethrower is going to be a major weapon that's going to come along that's going to be used to actually attack them and kind of undig the Japanese soldiers out, right? And another big thing that's going to end up occurring is that since they're so geographically dug in, it's going to really be a very slow siege. But a lot of you know a very famous picture from the siege of Iwo Jima, and that is this one right here. It's when the literal flag was being planted at the top of Iwo Jima by these American soldiers, right? Very, very famous picture from one of these island hopping strategies. But then, once they took over Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the American generals and president at the time then are faced with a decision. Once you're that close, because if you look at this map, that is Okinawa, there is Iwo Jima. Japan is right there, right? Now you're faced with a decision, do you invade Japan directly? What's your call here, right? Because if they were that dug in to all these little islands and that many Americans' lives were lost trying to take it, what's it going to be like when you try to attack their homeland? Is it going to be even worse? Will they fight to the last person? And then a very weird series of decisions comes up. And it's all mainly motivated by a secret scientific campaign that was going on the entire war known as the Manhattan Project, right? So a big couple of things coming up right now that we need to go ahead and jot down is the Manhattan Project, what it is, was a secret scientific campaign led by several scientists. Some of them actually German scientists that defected away from Germany when Hitler came to power and ran away to the United States. Albert Einstein was involved in this, but the big guy that was involved in this is this dude right here. His name is Roger Oppenheimer, right? Roger spelled R-O-G-E-R, and then Oppenheimer is O-P-P-E-N-H-E-I-M-E-R. Roger Oppenheimer. And this secret campaign was to try and create probably the worst weapon that's ever been created in the history of the world. They created the first nuclear bombs, right? And Roger Oppenheimer, even up until the day he died, said, it's something I wish we could uninvent, right? Because then what's going to happen is FDR died on April 12th, a month before VE Day even happened, a month before Victory in Europe ever even happened. And someone rises to presidency by the name of Harry S. Truman, right? And Truman made one of the most controversial decisions in a lot of American history when he decided to take these nuclear arms and drop them on civilian targets in Japan, right? And these targets were known as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? And these bomb droppings led to the deaths of over 200,000 Japanese civilians, right? The names of the bombs were known as Little Boy, which is this nuclear armament right there, and then the other one was called Fat Man because he was much, much larger, right? Now, these bombs, when dropped, were dropped 3 days apart. One was dropped on August 6, 1945, and the other one was dropped on August 9th, 1945. And the damage caused by them was absolutely devastating. Like, when you can actually go back and look at some of these pictures and stuff like that, the bomb aftermath Hiroshima. There we go. So now, like, what you can actually see is they didn't just take these cities out, they erased them from the map. These bombs had enough force to literally disintegrate human life, right? It is absolutely insane the amount of destruction that these like explosions caused, killing people like in an instant, which is absolutely terrifying. And then what ends up happening though is it's a very weird decision because did the Japanese then surrender? Yes, they surrendered September 2nd, 1945, about a month after the war, like the bombs were dropped. But the thing about it is again, they were dropped on civilian targets, which is another really big reason why it was so controversial, right? But Japan is going to surrender in September 2nd, 1945. And the insane part about it is that that is going to lead to the end of World War II. And the big thing when you're looking at it is, overall, it is believed that the conflict of World War II cost the lives of anywhere between 85 and 100 million people, which is 3 to 5% of the world population, right? If you couple that with the losses of World War I, it's actually closer to 130 million people that died in the span of 50 years, right? Which is absolutely wild. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like important to leave you on that note with this class because literally the history is the study of our mistakes in a lot of ways. And rarely it's the study of our triumphs, but it is important to study the mistakes of the past so we can actually learn from them and be prepared to spot them when they're actually on their way again. But the big thing I got to do now, though, is let you know that, y'all, that is it, right? So, like, that's it. That is the course. That is Honors Western Civ. You have made it, you have done it, and you are done, right? Like, you are done. This is your last flip, and this is a big, big moment, right? Because I want to go ahead and say a giant thank you, right? So, like, I want to say a giant thank you to all of you, every single one of you, Mackenzie, Lily, Kaylin, Kirsten, Abby, Gabrielle Fisher, Gianna, Damari, Delaney, Lily J. Diaz, Gabby, Molly, am I on a roll right now? I think I'm on a roll right now. McKenna, Cobb, Marissa, Giselle, Zoe, Emma Ruddy, Allie Domingue, Ava Smith, Natalie, Ava Smith, Natalie, now I'm bumping up for the forward, Christina Garcia, of course, Nina Steer, and last but certainly not least, Lucy Nakan. I want to say a giant thank you to every single one of you. It has been an absolute blast this year. Having y'all, getting a chance to teach y'all, laughing with y'all, having these moments, just literally having days where I'm having an awful day and then I got to see y'all and it made it all so much better, right? I am so proud of every single one of you. And I think that every single day I will not be as happy or excited to not see kids like Gianna laughing or kids like Kirsten saying, make me dance again and stuff like that. And I just want to say that if y'all ever need anything, you know I am here, right? So I will always be here. I will always be here to help you, even if it's with U.S. history, right? So if you need help next year, you know I'm here and you know that I'm very, very willing to do anything and everything for you, right? So I'm going to leave you on that note. And if y'all ever want to just hang out and talk, I'm not very far away, all right? So I'll miss you guys so much next year. Y'all are the best. See y'all soon, okay?